Good morning, everyone. This is a bit of a novel and a new area for us. We are a group of people in the mBIT community who have a Christian faith, and following a few questions about how do we use this in Christianity, how has it changed our own faith, we thought we'd have a conversation. There's no set questions, there's no script, just a beautiful, deep connection and conversation with each other about what mBIT and Christianity means to us and how we weave them in together in our daily lives. So my name's Suzanne Hemwood. Most of you listening from the mBIT community will know me. I live in New Zealand and been involved in mBIT pretty much from the beginning and have been a Christian since day one, as long as I can remember, brought up in a Christian household. But I can tell you the day when I prayed for myself to a person for the first time. And it was the 17th of July, 1981, the day my dad died. And at that point I was 15 and I prayed for myself really to a person. So that's the date at which I consider that I became a Christian, in grief, in crisis, as you'll hear many people do. So I'm going to hand over. Whoever wants to pick up next, say hi, say who you are, where you are, and whatever you feel led to say as part of an introduction. Don't all speak at once.
I'm Andrew. I'm currently in New Zealand. I've been here about a week. I'm usually based over in Europe. I'm actually a system architect and writer, but I've just really started to become more involved with mBraining. I've just done my mBIT coaching certification. Really was blown away by it. I am a very strong believer that people have been put together for a reason, that things happen for a reason. I've been praying to God, I think my whole life. I was brought up to do it. So as I became older, I realized that I was doing it for a reason. And I genuinely believe that through mBraining, I'm able to get even closer to God, but we'll talk about that more as we move forward. And I'll stop babbling on and let somebody else have a go.
Well, I'm Carl, and I'm in the States. And the Chapter 9 thing that I have been trying to do is to develop some linkages between mBraining and liberal Christian theology. I was fascinated, and still am, by what happens if you turn nouns into verbs. And so in my lexicon, it is now Godding, not God, because it's an active force. And I started blogging about 6 months ago. You get my name, carlgillett.blog, and you'll find me. And there is reference in those blogs to the mBraining thing, but the blog is not necessarily written for mBrainers. So I haven't gotten very deep into mBraining yet there, but I'm talking about different ways of doing theology and different ways of looking at classic theological issues. I think mBraining has a great way of helping us reclaim the heart-centeredness of the Christian faith. Both we read about this in the Old Testament a lot, about the heart-centered approach to living, and I think the New Testament is full of it. So because God is love, and love is in the heart, and we go from there.
Beautiful. Thank you, Carl.
Sarah, go.
Okay. Everyone's being polite to the British in me. Okay, so I'm Sarah Carruthers, English originally, now based in on the west coast of the North Island in New Zealand. My journey to Christianity, has been an interesting one. I was brought up a Christian, but walked away from my faith around about the age of 13 due to circumstances in my life. And I came back to faith maybe 4 or 5 years ago, after a miscarriage actually. And yeah, it's just been building rapidly. Yeah, I feel like God has been, yeah, just doing an incredible work in my and my husband's life, because he also came back to faith. And for me, that journey has been massively helped with mBraining, in terms of I'm very much more into the contemplative style of Christianity, and that idea of originally having a head-based faith, you know, the theory of, oh yes, tick tick tick, I logically believe, and yes, this man Jesus existed, and that Case for Christ, Lee Strobel style, I think, is where I began a few years ago. And over time, it's become much more of a heart-based faith, that rather than, yeah, trying to logic my way into this, it's yeah, it has very much dropped into my heart, and that is where I feel, yeah, that's now where I feel God's presence, when I find that stillness, and I use balanced breathing, I use, yeah, kind of everything I've learned in mBraining when I sit with God each day, when I contemplate on him, when I, yeah, kind of meditate, yeah, kind of on his word. And for me, there's that 2 Corinthians 4, I think it's verse 7, which is around this idea of us being broken pots, and that it's through our brokenness that God's light shines through. And for me, yeah, that's kind of been my journey, that yeah, kind of I am this kind of jar of clay, and slowly becoming more transparent, slowly becoming more open to, yeah, sharing my faith, more open to using my brokenness, using my sins, my challenges, to, yeah, to share God's word. And it doesn't have to be through talking. It's, yeah, it can just be through, actually, you don't have to use words, yeah, to share his truth. So more and more for me, that's been, yeah, the shift that's happened over the last few years.
Beautiful. Jan, it has to be you now.
Yes. No, sorry, my wife is just dancing around here behind me. So I think the best terms that I can use to describe my journey so far is, I have been thoroughly churched my entire life, aggressively so, and then so South Africa is a bit of a hodgepodge of church traditions and denominations all over the place. So I grew up in a Dutch Reformed church, to hold fast in the Afrikaans community, which laid my foundation, but it was horrifyingly boring, because it is I'm calling it as it is, because it's a very head-based faith oriented thing, but which was fantastic. So I had a very similar experience with actually meeting the Lord in 2004, when I was 17 years old, and but then I got hit by the Pentecostal train, but it was glorious and furious, and burning crosses and writing forgiveness letters and sending them down a river and that type of stuff. So it was. That's also my first instance of actually experiencing really in your face supernatural activity, seeing and literally witnessing stuff happening which defied all logic. And I realized I had to tap into this, and this was a profound experience for me. Because I was confronted with a God of love, who, after all was said and done, had absolutely no reason to accept me, but who did. And it was such an overwhelming experience that it took me a few days just to digest what was happening, and truly come to terms of what actually changed. But it had such a profound impact on me that I went to study theology loved it. Absolutely loved it, I must say. Due to the it was part of the Pentecostal tradition. I don't know whether you know about the AFM, the Apostolic Faith Mission in South Africa, but it was actually brought to South Africa by an American, by John G. Lake. And he hit Cape Town 100 years back, and ever since it has been spreading through Africa at an alarming rate. Well, at a profound rate. It can be alarming. But also part of my journey has also been like Sarah, incorporating your contemplative traditions, exploring some of the faith traditions in the Catholic background, even your Orthodox background. I'm extremely interested in the biblical languages, so I'm actually finishing up, praise Jesus, my PhD now in biblical Hebrew. So I'm profoundly over it at this point. It was a birthing process of 6 years, and may the 7th be Hebrewless, but goodness. So mBIT and mBraining came in the middle of me writing this dissertation, and it had such a profound impact on my understanding of what is the dissertation is on how the ancient Israelites used the Psalms and the edited Psalter as we see it now to reorient themselves out of cultural trauma after the Babylonian exile. And I focus specifically on a lament psalm, Psalm 74, which actually laments the destruction of the temple, and asks the question, so now that has happened, how does God relate to us? And just the mBraining perspective of especially the gut and the heart. And after doing Master Coach, there was some fascinating stuff going in there as well, of how does one rebuild an identity after your entire world has been ripped apart by violence. And it is turning into a very profound journey, because what we are busy seeing in Southern Africa, not just South Africa, but Southern Africa, is the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, actually said it. South Africa is in immense cultural trauma, and nobody knows how to move out of it. So it's busy converging into something absolutely brilliant. I'm not quite sure where it is going, but I definitely see a need for mBIT within the Christian communities as well, because it's just such a freaking brilliant heuristic to help people navigate. It just works, and what is absolutely brilliant is it works across cultural and linguistic boundaries, because that's the problem we experience. Your African languages do not make the head-heart distinction always as part of their vernacular, or they group the gut and the heart together without realizing it. And just giving people these words. I had a brilliant session with a Nigerian woman. I mentioned it a bit on in the email previously, where she was fearing for her life because of these xenophobic attacks, and they're not stopping. It is horrifying, and it's extremely violent, and people have lost their lives. And how people are coping with it, it just shows to me that there's a huge need for mBraining and for mBIT, because it's people are so traumatized that they don't have the words. The head does not help us here. So that's my story in short.
Well, beautiful. I mean, yeah. One, I'm in awe. PhD in, yeah. No, I'm sorry. I'm not a biblical scholar, so you know, the levels of conversation. I'll give the other extreme of the conversation. It's purely practical.
Don't become one. It's not worth it.
But also listening to you about the language of heart and gut, and we have the same within some of the Pacific Island language systems here. I had a conversation many years ago with Grant when I had done an introductory session in a not-for-profit management course, and there was a Samoan and Tongan guy talking to each other, looking like, I'm not getting you. And I looked at them and I realized I'd lost them, and I went back and talked to them, and they said they don't have language for heart and gut. It's like the whole thing is torso. And my immediate head-based response was, oh, the model doesn't work. So going to Grant and saying, hey, have you come across, what's this about? And beautiful conversations around tribal beginnings, where your gut has to be so closely tied to your heart because they're one and the same thing in terms of you fight to protect, etc., etc. You divorce from gut. When you divorce in Aboriginal language, you divorce from gut, not heart. So there's some beautiful parallels there with some of those conversations that I had all those years ago. Amazing to hear your stories, and already I'm thinking we're not going to have enough time to get through everything. So where do we go next? I'm going to start with the basics, and it probably shows my preference of being head-based. In terms of how do you understand this beautiful, what did you call it? Frickin' brilliant heuristic. I'm going to adopt that. Frickin' brilliant heuristic. FBH.
Yes.
And the Christian faith. And if they're going to weave together, where do you weave them? And when I first kind of started trying to weave them together, or ask within this heuristic process a Christian kind of interaction weaving in, my head-based preference at that point thought, well, it's spiritual, it's above me, therefore it will go above me on the foundational sequence, that you'll have spirit and then head and then heart and then gut. And it didn't flow easily, and it didn't flow well. And again, you go to the font of all knowledge. I go and have a conversation with Grant, and he said, well, you know, I think spirit connects in at heart level. Why don't we put it parallel to heart, and then you're going either an extra loop here, or anyway, I tried that and it stuck, and that's pretty much where I would go as my default place. Having said that, Sarah and I have both done refocusing counselling, where Diane Divot, who runs that, it's a Christian counselling model, asks the question, where is God for you right now, or where is God for you in this, and allows them to place him. So I'm curious, as you've used mBIT, this freaking beautiful heuristic, with your Christian faith and exploration, how have you woven it in? Where have you woven it in? How did you get that link?
For me, it's strange, because I was aware of the thing that I discovered, but hadn't really thought about it well, obviously not in an mBIT way, because I didn't know about mBraining. But what I feel is that when I pray, sometimes, and we all do it, sometimes we pray but we're not quite there, and you end the prayer and you think, oh, that wasn't really very fulfilling and I didn't really make a connection. But there are other times when it just clicks, and you say a prayer and you feel safe and secure, and you feel like you know where to move next, and you feel the compassion, and you just feel like everything's going to be okay, and all of your thoughts in your head are all lined up, everything is connected. And for that reason, I kind of felt like yes, this was coming through the heart. And being a technologist, I kind of started thinking about it in terms of a technology perspective. So the whole thing about how the heart is 5,000 times, it gives out a field that's 5,000 times more powerful than the head. And then I started thinking, well, you know, the heart maybe is also kind of like the modem. That's where we make the connection, through the heart, and everything else connects up through the heart. So when you make that really strong connection, everything's in line, and you've got highest expression, and everything's going through the heart, and then it's going out to God, and God's coming back through into the heart. So I think for me, that's where it all takes place. It's all coming in and going out through the heart, but the rest of us is connecting in through there.
Beautiful. Don't you love other people's map of the world? Never in a million years would I have come up with a modem analogy for the heart. But hey, Gail, lovely to see you. We've kind of gone round and introduced ourselves, and we've done a little bit of background. So do you want to just say, hey, I'm Gail, I'm in London, or whatever? I've maybe just said it for you, sorry.
Yeah. I was like,
So, hey, I'm Gail, I'm in London.
hello, Gaily.
Apologies, I'm late. I'm on NLP trainers training, and we were doing demos tonight that ran on a bit later than I expected. So
Very exciting.
Very exciting. So I'm delighted actually to be part of this. I love mBraining, and I am deeply spiritual. So for me, this has just been an awesome adventure, and looking forward to seeing how I share that on this video. Yeah.
Beautiful. So we're just talking about how you integrate what we've renamed as a frickin' brilliant heuristic, which is mBIT, and Christianity. So if you were looking at the foundational sequence, if you're looking at using it in a practical way, where does that integration come? Where does it link in? And we just heard Andrew just share that from his perspective. That's where we're at in the ball.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to share if that helps. So
Jump
for
in.
me, I did a Christian course, I guess, at a church some time ago around trying to identify where and how I hear when God is talking to me. And I've kind of put that learning in the foundational sequence for me. And so that very much links into heart, head, heart, gut, heart, and then kind of going out to God as if he's outside of me, essentially, as a kind of check-in to my alignment, and bringing that back into the heart and aligning that. So somewhere between my heart and my gut at a real identity yet real connecting level is kind of where God fits in for me, and where I hear his voice.
Beautiful. So without putting words in your mouth, is that solar plexus, or is that a genuine combination of heart and gut that kind of comes together?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I could say exactly, but it feels kind of a heart and gut thing rather than solar plexus.
Sure. Beautiful. Thank you. Who else? Where have you put it in your foundational sequence?
Can I jump in at this point?
Of course you can.
So, so what was fascinating for me, guys, was yet again coming from a very head-based Christianity, which was my base, and then jumping into a almost Christmas tree explosive experiential Pentecostal. We didn't go full charismatic. That was not it. But the Pentecostal emphasis on now, whether this is weird or not, go home to it, is the phenomenon of glossolalia, or praying in or speaking in tongues. Now, this was fascinating, and I want to read to you because this was the first thing that I went to after my mBIT cert. And I'm going to read for you out of 1 Corinthians 14. And this is from verse 14, if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my mind is unfruitful. So this was when I read it, I was like, ooh, tingly. So what shall I do? I will pray with my spirit, but I will also pray with my understanding. I will sing with my spirit, but I will also sing with my understanding. Otherwise, when you are praising God in the spirit, how can someone else who is now put into the position of an inquirer or a hearer say amen if they do not understand you? So, and I really delved into the whole phenomenon of what happens when we pray. Paul speaks about we edify ourselves. It's a self-edification phenomenon. Unless there is an interpreter or an interpretation of tongues. I've seen both of these phenomena where it has been a highly edifying experience for the individual, and then the moment there's an interpretation, people can partake. So I struggled a little bit about why this whole thing of the mind being unfruitful. So I took a look at what happened to myself as I prayed in tongues, and it was a definite heart, gut, and when you really delve into it, there were if it's really working through stuff, there's a whole ringing and clamor of the ANS and even the pelvic brain, and it turns it. And what was fascinating for me, Suzanne, is many times the foundational sequence occurs, yes, but sometimes it is. It's almost like a spark running through a DB board that just can't contain it, and it's all over the place, and it's a very godly guided thing. And I've had solar plexus combinations. I've even had profound the connections with the ANS with the fat cells from an energetics perspective. And when I say it's a bodily antenna that's in constant realignment and constant movement. The foundational sequence is definitely there, but there are sometimes where I seriously experience the Spirit just breaking the rules for whatever reason he has. And what is fascinating is the moment I go mind, when I go head brain again, it's as if it's not I don't form the experience, I comment on it. The very prayer and the very phenomenon of praying in tongues and allowing this to happen is the reality, and the head brain has to catch up, if that makes sense. The head brain is also the one that allows me to communicate to others, to make the link for others. But the identity statement and the profound working through stuff, that's I can tell you, I've had wonderful experiences with head, heart, gut, ANS, and pelvic brain all over the place.
Beautiful. Interesting. So can I just ask you a question? If you, because you
No.
said you, no, but I'm going to anyway. I'm going to break the rules as well. So I can't remember your exact words, but you said something like, if you go to the head, it's like you're looking in on. So if you go to the head, does it take you out of that beautiful spiritual connection? Is there a risk that once the head gets involved, you disconnect from your speaking in tongues?
Now, this is fascinating.
You said I couldn't ask you, though.
Yeah. The moment, and I've seen this in biblical exegesis as well of the Psalms. The moment I comment, I dissect. And you can dissect a frog, but then it dies.
Yeah.
And this has really been my experience. The moment I go descriptive, it's a very useful exercise, but the experiential dimension definitely dies down.
Sure.
I had a beautiful experience last night while traveling back from Cape Town on the airplane, where I just read the story of Zacchaeus and really getting a grips of what Jesus actually did there. And it was a thump in the gut of, I have no freaking idea who you are, Lord. Who is this Jesus that I might know him? And I was so gut-centered that it constantly shut the mind up. It was, I wanted to comment. I wanted to go head-based and let's describe this. And the gut was just like, and it was an awe of really let's not comment on it. Let's not dissect it yet.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I have been working with a woman who easily shifts into hypnotic trance. And when she moves from head brain to heart, gut, pelvis, we get glossolalia from her. Because, and I end up being the head brain to report back to her later on what transpired. But the head brain has got to be there to do this, to do the reporting, because as you say, that's where my language comes from.
Exactly.
My English comes out of my head. Once in a while, it's not very good English, but it comes out of my head. But
so where does, excuse, this is good, I'm fascinated now, right? So we know we got Broca's area in the head, and that's where language comes from. I naively, and probably from a head base, have always thought that speaking in tongues is another form of language, therefore there's a head element to it. And now I'm hearing, right, so which language center is forming the tongues that is a different language?
well, if the tongue is at the upper reaches of the gut brain, it may be directed by the gut brain.
Oh, fascinating.
So this is where things get weird. There's not I've looked. There are not a lot of fMRI scans out there. It has been done, but the moment people switch to glossolalia, your language centers do decrease in activity, definitely, and they do see a cortisol reduction, a definite cortisol reduction that's almost immediate, a spike in serotonin, if I remember correctly, and also gradual increase of oxytocin.
Wow. Wow. It's worth the call just for this conversation. Wow, I don't know what to say. Right, let me pull it back together because we're going to run out of time. I'm hesitant to move on, but I am going to move on. Anyone else? How do you weave it in, or should we move on to another one of the kind of topics that we thought we'd?
Well, I'd like to comment a little about that. For a long, long time, going back to the 1960s, I've seen Godding as the ground of being, rather than which was what Paul Tillich was trying to get us to understand. And if we talk about the multiple brains being coherent, and Grant used to refer to the wisdom flowing through the coherence, is not that wisdom divine spirit flowing through a coherent system? And that makes sense to some of the people I've talked to, so that that gives me a way of looking at how this works. And I think if we don't get if we get the head brain involved last, and let that wisdom flow as the head brain gets on stream with a coherence, I think we can see and feel the Godding presence moving in us.
So if I were then doing an mBIT session with a Christian client, would I disregard the foundational sequence and go very much heart, gut, heart, head, and leave head till last?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess because you're talking about whole coherence, whole body, my head's going master coach ANS, and therefore where do you bring ANS into that?
Well, sometimes I think the ANS is just another brain, because
and that's, you know, that is exactly how we treat it at master coach level.
no.
But in terms of that foundational, and I totally agree with you, Carl. I think for me, when I am in coherence and when that wisdom is flowing, I think of that as God's wisdom through me, that I'm tapping into his wisdom. Absolutely. That I only get there when I'm in my coherent state and connected outwards.
And when you work with clients, I want to find out where the blockages are that prevent the coherence.
Yeah.
There's a lot of resemblance between the ancient chakra systems of the East and the mBraining way of looking at things. And where is the blockage? If it's in the gut, why? If it's in the heart, why? I worked for a while with a woman who, in her early 60s, had 2 heart attacks a year apart. And what we have is a lady who had her heart blocked. Big head, small heart. And we spent 3 or 4 years working on that. Fortunately, she'd made some progress.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So, in my experience, I think about that Theophan, the recluse quote around, to pray is to descend with the mind into the heart, and there to stand before the face of the Lord, ever present, all seeing within you. And for me, that's my experience, that as soon as I get out of my head, as soon as I come into balance and coherence, and rather than stop trying to intellectualizing, kind of things, God will show me the way forward. And, I believe it's not my wisdom that comes out. It's, that's the Holy Spirit inside me. If I'm working by myself, quietly, kind of praying, or kind of doing a process, I find that wisdom comes out more through journaling than if I'm just sitting there kind of go, okay, well, head brain, what do you think? Heart brain, what do you think? Gut brain. So tuning into my body, coming into balance, coming into coherence, taking my presence from my head down into my heart and gut, which for me are very connected, and then just allowing a flow of words to come, having some quietness and kind of space inside. And that's where I find me, or being most connected with God. And then if I think about my experience when worshiping, when singing, that's my autonomic nervous system that God is talking through. I feel this beautiful, I think to use your word, Jan, this kind of energy, this just this overwhelming feeling of love that is present in my entire world, that is present in my skin, in my ANS, that is present in my heart. There are no words, but I feel completely loved, completely in God's presence. So I think, God talks to us in different ways, in different contexts. I don't think there is a one way. I think, back to that refocusing, question that Diane uses, which is, where is God for you? He is a highly personal God. He will find the way that is best to connect to each and every individual. So us as coaches working with others, do you believe in a higher power? Do you believe in a God? Yes, you do. Awesome. Okay, so if you were to connect into that higher power now, if you were connect into into God, where would he be for you? Which part of your body, is it inside you? Is it outside you? And just working with that, that system. For me personally, he's in my heart. The Holy Spirit is 100% for me. How it's present when I'm working, formal mBraining, sequence, and he doesn't come in order. He comes in when it's kind of right for the Spirit to speak. The goal for me is to be quiet and listen, is to shut off the head brain and just be present. And it's in his time, not my time. So just giving, that opportunity, and just to hold it kind of open-handed, like if you were holding a butterfly, you don't grasp onto it so tight that, God, I really need you now, please, please arrive. You just hold it gently, hold it lightly.
To be fair, I do that sometimes as well, but
Well, my praying is that stuff. You know, there's a desperation often to my prayer. But if I'm wanting to hear from God, if I'm wanting to have an experience of His wisdom, yeah, that holding lightly, that quietness, descending from the mind into the heart, standing before the face of God, ever present, all seeing, yeah, within you. Yeah.
So let me go controversial again. So when we teach mBIT, we teach heart rate variability and coherence as a heart-based thing. But we know that coherence is actually much wider than that. And true coherence is also bringing the gut, the head, the ANS, and I would argue that spiritual also into coherence with. And yet what I'm hearing in these conversations is, right, when you shut the head down, when you take the head out of the equation. So my challenge is, if we're taking the head out of the equation, are we truly in coherence? And is there a way then of being able to have the head in the equation, but rowing in the same direction, so that it also facilitates this deeper coherence and connection?
I think there is, and let me say a little bit about that, because I like to train people to distinguish between beholding and observing. And one of my favorite illustrations is Van Gogh's Starry Night. He beheld the stars and he painted the picture. He didn't analyze the stars to see how far away they were or what they were made of or anything like that. If we can teach the head brain to behold what's going on in the rest of the system, then we get that, avoid the paralysis of analysis that screws things up, and maybe gives the head brain a more equal role in the beholding process that way. Beautiful. I think gut and heart and pelvis behold all the time, and mine talks to me once in a while about what it's been beholding.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that. And where does that fit then with going meta? So is beholding meta, or is beholding associated? I've got a hand going up now. Jan, do you want to jump in? Or Carl, do you want to carry on?
So fascinatingly, I want to answer your question by introducing a whole new topic.
Thanks, Ian.
So I don't know where many of you are in terms of having done Master Coach or not, but Suzanne, Master Coach broke me. In
a good way, hopefully.
Yeah, sure.
It's a journey, right?
This is the fascinating part about the meta, and this is a personal experience. Yet again, within the Pentecostal tradition, there's a very firm notion of a revelation being a physical thing. It's a thing. It's an occurrence that happens to you, and it's fascinating. It's realizing something or going to a deeper level, or however people describe it. There is a distinct pattern which I pick up regarding myself, especially if I go meta on a certain topic, and it starts with the ANS. It's almost to a T. I get the goosebumps, or I get an itch, or there's that heightened sense of this is significant. Within a few minutes, there's a heart or gut response. So I've picked up that in enabling a lot of my clients to go meta is making them aware of what are you picking up, and it's an ANS centered vibey thing, and it's almost within a minute or two. There's a gut to a heart response. Sometimes even pelvic brain, it's not as common. So it gives me the sense that if we talk about God speaking to us, And this was where something really grabbed me about, yet again, about an African language. There's an African language that they speak in my area. It's called Setswana. They don't make the distinction between sensing in the sense of hearing something, becoming aware, or becoming, or even beholding in the sense that we would locate it within the visual sense. They don't. They're located as I become aware of something which is behind me or off to the side. So this whole awareness thing of the ANS grabbed me, that is usually where the process of revelation starts. It's not a head thing. It's not even a heart thing. It's an ANS thing for me. And then there can be a heart response, and we go the foundational sequence from there. And once the head picks up on it, it solidifies. It makes it communicatable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm guessing the head being the head would be the making meaning of and in the interpretation of as well. That yeah.
Yes.
But the head is usually the one to catch up.
Right.
Yes, I would agree.
Can I
Wow.
jump in there?
Of course you can.
So for me, I would say I need to get into coherence first, at which point my head is fully engaged. But in coherence, it's not necessarily quiet, it's just simplified. So then hearing God's voice and making sense of what it's saying for me seems to be very easy. Whereas if I'm not in coherence first, my head goes off in 10 billion directions. And so then I maybe think I'm hearing what God's saying, and then a week later it goes, oh, maybe that wasn't quite what I thought it was, because I just had too much. But for me, if I go through foundational sequence, whether for me, I incorporate my ANS pelvic brain into that. When I find coherence within myself, that's when I sense more around God's voice or God talking, rather than me, if you like, mind reading what I think God might be saying because it feels right, or it sounds right, or I think that must be right in that moment. And then there's less words to articulate it, but it still makes sense in that moment. So there's less of the thinking and trying to make sense. It already does, because I'm already in a coherent place. And that comes for me to that verse, that be still first and know. And the coming into coherence is a be stilling of myself.
So immediately my mind jumps to the word intuition. When you say about just knowing, where does this link with intuition?
I think that for me, intuition is very much a gut response, whereas this knowing is kind of an all brains response.
Yeah, see, talking to Grant about intuition, he says you can have intuition from all of the brains.
All at the same time?
I
just wanted to say that intuition shifts for me personally.
Yeah. And that intuition, when it is integrated and moves freely between, you just know. And there is no language necessarily, there's no even one location. It does kind of flood the whole body, and you just know.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps that's God's voice.
Perhaps.
So just building on that, so I did an online course around hearing God's voice, and the woman, I've forgotten her name, but she divided people in, there was kind of 4 types, and she said, some people just know, they just know in their body that this is a kind of, something from God, that this is kind of the way forward. Other people can sense it, this matches up with NLP. Other people, you know, hear a word, might hear an audible voice, might kind of see it in the written word, and I've forgotten the last one. But for
Nature.
Sorry.
Nature.
No.
Hearing God's voice in nature.
Or seeing, visual.
Yeah. So images, yes, yeah. So they get images or kind of metaphors, or yeah. And for me, that's the kind of the intuition part of going, you know, back to God being highly personal. He will give us that intuition, that knowing, that understanding in whatever way is right for us. So it might be when you are in balance, when you are in coherence, and my language would be around quietening the ego down. That, you know, Gail, you talked about kind of simplifying it. It is, you know, all day my monkey mind is going chatter, 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 chatter.
Yeah.
So bringing my body into balance, bringing my body into coherence is the way of quietening that chatter. I'm not shutting it off. It can still speak if it wants to, but if I can quieten it down, then I'm able to, to behold, to, kind of to listen to how God wants to communicate with me in the way that is exactly right for me in that moment. And some of that might come, you know, in terms of it's a vision, and it might be a vision that comes in the head, or it might be something that comes from the gut. My gut very much talks in images. It might be a word, and that word, you think it just comes from my heart. I don't know, you know, there is no language for me that explains how that comes up, how that works. Or having, you know, experience praying with others, and they say, I'm getting a picture, and that picture that doesn't come from their head. It comes from somewhere that is kind of right. You know, I don't understand exactly how it works, but I've had enough experiences of it, both myself and with others, that I believe it will be in the way that is just right for you. And it could be from any part of your body, or, you know, around you. Yeah, it's not a tick, here it goes in box number 1.
Well, I'm aware we've been talking for nearly an hour, and I'm guessing people listening are not going to want to listen to much more than that, but I know there's so much more that we could say. So I'm going to wildly put out the suggestion that we do this again at some point, not too far down the future. All sorts of areas where I had done kind of, we could talk about, you know, how it's impacted our faith, whether we've had any challenges to this as part of our faith, in some people thinking that maybe it's not even, you know, compatible with Christianity. So I think there's at least another 6 conversations to go. But before we go this morning, tonight, depending where you are in the world, I wonder if there's just something around a biblical verse that you go, this is the verse that really brings home to me the link with mBraining. And it's fine if there's not one on the tip of your tongue. I'm going to start you off with 2 Corinthians 1 verse 3 that talks about our Lord Jesus Christ being the Father of compassion. And I love that for me, and that we talk about mBIT being about wisdom and compassion, and the Father of compassion being Jesus. If ever there was a closer link to how this links to mBraining for me, that's beautifully it. So opening up, is there a verse? Is there a, whether or not you can remember it exactly, I'm not worried about that, not being a biblical scholar. But if you say, this is the one that I come back to, these are the words I come back to, that just holds me in that space, that in mBraining, I know that, you know, mBraining supports my Christianity in such a beautiful way.
So I'll jump in. I have a few, but the ones that tend to remind me around mBraining specifically is, and those beautiful scholars out there will know the verses. I should have written them down, but that we are so beautifully and wondrously made. And
Psalm 139.
there we go. Thank you, Suzanne. Just how beautiful. For me, mBraining has really helped me to just see how beautiful people are, just how uniquely and beautifully that they are made and created, and the power that they hold. So it brings the verses of the tongue is like a sword, a two-edged sword, and the power of what we say, the creative power of how we choose things. You know, we're made in the image of God, and God is a creator. And so there's so many verses. God is love, and even if you take Corinthians 13, you know, love is patient, love is kind, all those wonderful things, you know, speak to coherence for me. You know, to truly be compassionate both for people outside as well as compassionate for ourselves at the same time is that beautiful mixture of those kind of you know, patience, kindness, loving kindness, and the fruits of the Spirit. So there are so many verses for me that just go, yeah, this stuff is just bringing to life what we already know and making it, you know, kind of more biologically real, if that's the right word to use, because we are so beautifully and wonderfully made, and we still don't know everything, and it's incredible and it's exciting.
Beautiful.
One of the I've got two. There's actually quite a lot. If you start grappling with the Hebrew and the Greek, it's quite shocking. It's quite glaringly obvious.
I think I can safely say I'm not going to be going too deep down that route.
It's one of the most beautiful stuff in the New Testament is where Jesus had compassion. We translated had compassion on the masses when he fed the 5,000. The Greek verb there is he sensed with his spleen. So it's a gut brain response in the Greek language, and it speaks about a deep identification which moves you to action. Yeah. So it's a fascinating stuff. But the two stuff out of the the one thing about the Old Testament is where God answers Job, the whole story of Job. We have some insight which Job never had. We have background on the enemy entering and bringing a dispute and you know, just blackwashing poor Job. He didn't have that, obviously. So he had to make sense of what was happening to him. And fascinatingly, Job never receives an answer. Never. At the very end of the book of Job, God peppers him with 72 questions, which boggles the mind and cannot be answered from the head brain. And Job responds with, surely now I've heard of you, but now that I have seen you, I realize we can't properly describe you. And he literally makes a gut heart response of, so I abide, you are God, I am not. And that is enough for me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, I've got to jump in with the my Greek word for the day, because I looked it up beforehand and I know no Greek whatsoever. And I'll probably get the pronunciation wrong, so you can correct me. But the Greek word for compassion is splanchizomai.
Splanchizomai.
Oh, there you go. I'll just read you out the paragraph because it's fascinating on so many levels, which shares the same root as the word for gut or abdomen, which is what you're alluding to. It's also the splanchnic nerve is the nerve that in our abdomen that controls the diaphragm. So I love how while it is a gut-based compassion, it has to have that component of movement and I'd argue identity. It also links to the diaphragm, which links to the breath and coherence, balance throughout the system. So yeah, I thought it was lovely to remind ourselves that actually this was absolutely talked about in the Bible. Okay, anyone else? A nice Bible verse to leave on, and or
Well, I think one of my favorite things about Jesus telling us that we should love others the way we love ourselves. And so many people that I have dealt with don't love themselves very well. And mBraining gives us a wonderful way to get those folks out of their head and start understanding how to love themselves by taking care of the other brains. And then you can give them a more comprehensive way of loving their neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah, how many times do we coach people about that inner critical voice that is just so harsh on self? So harsh.
So quick two from me, Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And Jeremiah 29:13, you seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, that seems like a beautiful place to leave us. I just want to say a huge thank you for being willing to come and just have an open conversation about your faith. And yeah, who knows who will be listening or where that will lead. I would like to propose that we do it again and take the conversation further and in different directions, and invite other people if they want to join us. Get in touch with me, and we'll include you in the call next time. It's not an exclusive group by any stretch. It was just a group that had happened to express that they had a faith, so I knew that you existed as a Christian, so I could invite you in. Yeah, thank you so much. And you know, obviously we're here because God's put us here, and so thank to him as well for our connections and our journeying in mBIT as a Christian. Bless you all, and speak again very soon.
Thank you.
Just again, thank you.
Appreciate it.